I, Blair White, woke up in my small apartment in Brooklyn, New York. The morning sun streaming through the window illuminated the living room that was once filled with the laughter of my daughter, Sarah. But now, that room was enveloped in silence. I stopped the alarm clock and crawled out of bed. As I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I saw deep traces of fatigue etched under my 42-year-old eyes. Since losing Sarah to leukemia 5 years ago, it felt as though my life had lost its color. As I went through my morning routine, my eyes fell on Sarah's photograph displayed on the shelf. The smile of my daughter, who had fallen into eternal sleep at 13, still tugged at my heartstrings. "Good morning, Sarah," I whispered, lightly kissing the photo. This had become my daily ritual. Heading to the kitchen, I found Robert, my husband, already drinking his coffee. Even when I greeted him with a "good morning," he merely looked up from his newspaper without responding. Our relationship, once filled with love, had grown cold rapidly after Sarah's death. While eating breakfast, I checked my work schedule for the day. As an editor at a publishing house, my days chasing deadlines had become the only escape from my sorrow. "I'll be home late again today," I told Robert. He just nodded silently. The words, "be careful," and "I love you," that we used to exchange now existed only in our memories. I boarded the subway, heading to my office in Manhattan. On the train, I noticed a young mother and her little daughter sitting next to me. Seeing their smiles, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The thought always crossed my mind, if only Sarah were still alive. Arriving at the office, I sat down at my desk. A pile of manuscripts and a deadline calendar were waiting for me. I turned on my computer, telling myself that by immersing myself in work, I could forget my sorrow. During lunch, my colleague Jane approached me. "Blair, want to grab lunch together?" It was a kind invitation, but I politely declined. I had started avoiding social interactions since losing Sarah. In the afternoon meeting, I presented a proposal for a new project. Only while talking about work could I forget my sadness. But the moment I left the conference room, reality hit me. The children's book advertisement posted in the hallway brought back memories of Sarah. By the time I left the office in the evening, it was already dark outside. On my way home, I passed by the hospital. This place, which I had visited countless times with Sarah, still made me pause. It was also at this hospital that I had become acutely aware of the problems with the American healthcare system. The high cost of treatment, the narrow scope of insurance coverage. I realized that not just our family, but many others were experiencing the same suffering. Arriving home, Robert had already retreated to the bedroom. I turned on the TV alone, and a documentary about families battling childhood cancer was playing. I saw our own image reflected in the parents and children on the screen. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Before bed, I stopped in front of Sarah's room. I put my hand on the doorknob but couldn't bring myself to open it. "Good night, Sarah," I whispered to the door before heading to my own bedroom. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, another day just like this one would begin. Days of living with grief. But as I closed my eyes, I could feel Sarah's memory quietly living on in my heart. The morning light streamed through the window, and I woke up. As usual, I got out of bed with a heavy heart and completed my daily ritual of kissing Sarah's photo. Another unchanging day was supposed to begin. While having breakfast, I casually glanced at the mailbox and noticed an unfamiliar envelope. "That's strange," I thought as I picked it up, and was shocked to see the name on it. Miss Sarah White. My hands began to tremble. The name of my daughter who had passed away 5 years ago. Moreover, the sender was the local prestigious Stuyvesant High School. This must be some mistake, I told myself as I opened the envelope with shaking hands. What came out was undoubtedly an acceptance letter. "Dear Sarah White, we are pleased to inform you of your acceptance to Stuyvesant High School." The words danced before my eyes, and I lost my sense of reality. What's going on? Why? Various questions raced through my mind. Coming to my senses, I immediately called the school. Explaining the situation in a flustered state, the staff on the phone was silent for a moment before saying, "Mrs. White, we're terribly sorry. Regarding this matter, could you please come to the school in person so we can discuss it?" "I'll be there right away," I replied and hung up. My head was in a whirl, unable to comprehend what was happening. I stared at Sarah's smiling photograph, asking, "What's going on?" I hurriedly put on my coat and grabbed my bag. Before leaving the entrance, I looked at Sarah's photo once more. "Mom's going to get to the bottom of this," I vowed in my heart. I jumped on the subway and headed to the school. On the train, I checked the acceptance letter in my hand over and over again. The feel of the paper, the smell of the ink, everything was real. Yet, the content written there was completely at odds with my reality. Getting off at the station, I walked briskly towards the school. My heart rate increased, and my breathing became rapid. "Stay calm," I told myself, but my head was full of questions and anxiety. The Stuyvesant High School building came into view. This school, known as one of New York City's elite institutions, should normally be a place of joy and expectation. But for me now, it was only a symbol of mystery and anxiety. I took a deep breath in front of the school gate to calm myself. "Sarah, Mom's going to uncover the truth," I whispered in my heart as I stepped into the school with heavy feet. After explaining the situation at the reception, the staff looked at me with sympathetic eyes and said, "We've been expecting you. Please, this way." Walking down the hallway, I saw students' artwork and awards displayed on the walls. All things Sarah never got to experience. With a heavy heart, I knocked on the door of the room I was guided to. In response to a "Come in," I entered the room, and a middle-aged woman stood up to greet me. "Mrs. White, we've been expecting you." "I'm Meryl Thompson, the vice principal." Prompted to sit down, I took a seat with a tense expression. Meryl took a deep breath and began, "Mrs. White, actually." At that moment, I intuitively felt that my life was about to change dramatically. Meryl Thompson's voice echoed in the quiet conference room. "Mrs. White, actually." At these words, my heart began to race. This acceptance letter was indeed issued in the name of Sarah White. However, it's... Meryl continued, choosing her words carefully. It's for another child of your husband, Robert White. I was at a loss for words. My mind went blank, and I started to hear a ringing in my ears. Another child, was all I managed to utter. Meryl looked at me with sympathetic eyes and slowly continued her explanation. Mrs. White, we only became aware of this situation recently. In fact, Robert White has twin sons. Their names are Trey and Tom, and they're both 15 years old. This can't be true. I mumbled. Why are you telling me this? Meryl took a deep breath and said, last week, Trey took the entrance exam for Stuyvesant. At that time, his foster parent explained the situation to us. Various questions were swirling in my mind. Robert's betrayal, the hidden children, and why this school knew so much about it. Trey's mother knew about your existence. And she decided it was time to tell Trey the truth. Meryl continued. She wanted to reveal everything on this occasion. That's why she told us the details as well. I sank deep into my chair. But, why under Sarah's name? Meryl's expression turned apologetic. That's another surprise. Trey recently learned about your daughter. He strongly wished to enroll under the name of his deceased sister. At those words, something inside me seemed to break. Anger, sadness, and confusion all rushed in at once. I can't forgive this, I said in a trembling voice. Using Sarah's name, without permission. Meryl quietly continued. Mrs. White, we were also perplexed at first. But after hearing Trey's thoughts, he seems to genuinely care about Sarah. He wants to study at this school as a way of honoring the sister he never knew. I stood up. That's enough. I don't want to hear any more. Meryl hurriedly said, Mrs. White, we understand the complexity of this situation. That's why we felt it necessary to meet and talk with you directly. But my head was already full of confusion. Robert's betrayal, the hidden children, and using Sarah's name for admission. I couldn't forgive any of it. I'm going to the police, I suddenly declared. Meryl looked surprised. The police? Mrs. White, this is a family matter. Family? I gave a bitter laugh. I no longer know what family means. Robert has been deceiving us for years. This is a crime. Meryl said quietly, Mrs. White, I understand how you feel. But please, try to stay calm. I interrupted her words. I can't stay calm. For 5 years, I've been dealing with the grief of losing my daughter. And now, I'm told about my husband's betrayal and the existence of children I never knew about. Meryl stood up and approached me. Mrs. White, please. But I was already preparing to leave the room. Thank you, Miss Thompson. But I'm leaving now. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear the laughter of students. Perhaps Sarah would have laughed like this too, once upon a time. That thought squeezed my heart even tighter. Leaving the school gates, I stepped out onto the street. People were going about their day as usual, but my world had completely changed. I took out my cell phone and looked up the number for the local police station. I hesitated whether I should report this. However, I couldn't easily forgive such deception. Taking a deep breath, I started walking towards the police station. In my mind, Sarah's smile, Robert's betrayal, and the existence of sons I never knew about were all swirling together dizzily. The police station came into view. I stopped in front of the entrance and took another deep breath. "Sarah, Mom's going to uncover all the truth," I vowed in my heart as I pushed open the heavy door. As I opened the door to the police station, a blast of cold air conditioning brushed my cheeks. After briefly explaining the situation at the reception, a young female officer guided me to a small interview room. "Mrs. White, I'm Detective Jones. Please, tell me what's happened." Her voice was calm, which made me feel a bit more at ease. I took a deep breath and began explaining the shocking facts I had heard from Meryl Thompson at the school. As I spoke, I felt as if I was hearing my own voice from a distance. Was this really happening in my life? Detective Jones listened carefully, but in the end, she sighed. "Mrs. White, I understand how you feel. However, legally speaking." "You mean it's not a crime?" I said bitterly. "Infidelity itself is not a crime. However, if there's a possibility of bigamy, that's different." Detective Jones was choosing her words carefully. I held my head in my hands. "So the police won't do anything?" "We can investigate, but this is primarily a civil matter. I recommend you consult with a lawyer." As I left the police station, I was overcome with a sense of defeat. However, I couldn't give up. I took out my smartphone and started searching for private detective agencies. A few hours later, I was sitting in a small office in Manhattan, face to face with a middle-aged private detective named Mike Harris. "Mrs. White, don't worry. We'll uncover the truth," Harris said confidently, which gave me a glimmer of hope. "Please do. I have the right to know the truth." From that day on, my days became a mix of work and searching for the truth. While waiting for reports from Detective Harris, I started my own investigation. As I researched statistics on infidelity in divorce on the internet, I was shocked by the current situation in America. About 50% of marriages end in divorce, and over 20% of those are due to infidelity. The thought that we might just become part of these statistics made me sad. A week later, I received a call from Detective Harris. "Mrs. White, I've got some important information. Can we meet?" When I rushed to his office, Detective Harris spread some photos on his desk. These are Trey and Tom. The 15-year-old boys in the photos indeed resembled Robert. I felt a tightness in my chest. Their mother's name is Lisa Johnson. It seems she had a relationship with Robert 20 years ago. 20 years ago. I mumbled. "Before we met." Detective Harris continued. "Lisa got pregnant, but Robert didn't take responsibility. She raised the twins alone, but when things got financially tough, she contacted Robert about 5 years ago." 5 years ago. A flash of realization hit me. Around the time Sarah passed away. Yes. Robert learned about Trey and Tom's existence and started providing financial support secretly. But he kept it from you. Everything started to make sense. Robert's sudden increase in overtime, mysterious expenses, and the distance between us. But why now? Lisa has fallen seriously ill and was worried about the children's future. She probably wanted Robert to take full responsibility. I sank deep into my chair. For the past 20 years, another family had existed without my knowledge. The reality of single parents in America crossed my mind. About 30% of all households are single-parent families, and many of them face financial difficulties. Lisa must have been part of those statistics. "Mrs. White," Detective Harris said quietly. "What do you want to do next?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to meet them. Trey and Tom, and Lisa. I want to see the whole truth with my own eyes." Detective Harris nodded. "I understand. I'll arrange an appointment." As I left the office, the setting sun was painting the city red. A new reality was waiting for me. Whatever it might be, I was determined to face it. For Sarah's sake, and for my own. I woke up to a phone call from Detective Harris. It was still before dawn. "Mrs. White, we found out where Trey and Tom are." My heart raced at those words. "Where are they?" I asked hurriedly. "They're being raised by separate foster parents. It seems Lisa Johnson became seriously ill and entrusted the children to foster care." I gasped. "Separately? But why? It's often difficult to place siblings in foster care together. I'll explain the details when we meet." That afternoon, I was standing in a quiet residential area in the suburbs of New York. This was the house where Trey was said to be living. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. The door opened, and a warm-looking middle-aged woman appeared. "Mrs. White. Welcome. I'm Carol, Trey's foster mother." I was shown into the living room, and there I met Trey for the first time. He looked just like Robert. "Hello, Mrs. White," his voice was surprisingly calm. "Trey." I was at a loss for words. "When I found out about you." "You must have been surprised," Trey finished my sentence. I couldn't believe it at first either. "But when I learned about Sarah, my sister, I wanted to meet you." Carol quietly added an explanation. "Trey came to us 3 years ago. His mother Lisa was seriously ill." "But why foster care?" I couldn't help but ask. Trey answered, "Mom wanted to give us a stable environment. But with her illness, it was difficult on her own." As I listened, I keenly felt the complexity of the American foster care system. The fact that about 400,000 children use the foster care system every year. Among them, Trey seemed to have been placed in a relatively good environment. "Tom, where is your brother?" I asked nervously. Trey's expression clouded. "Tom, his situation is different from mine." The next day, I was standing in front of a rundown apartment in the Bronx. This was where Tom was said to be. When I knocked on the door, a man with an unkempt beard appeared. What do you want? His tone made me flinch. I've come to see Tom. Tom. The man reluctantly opened the door. The room inside was messy, and the smell of alcohol lingered in the air. From the back room, a thin boy appeared. Who? His voice was feeble. Tom. I stumbled over my words. How should I introduce myself? Tom stared at me intently. You're Blair, aren't you? Those words tugged at my heart. Yes, I've come to see you. As we talked, Tom's situation became clear. His foster parent had taken him in for the purpose of collecting child support. He wasn't even given proper meals, and sometimes there was even violence. I remembered the statistic that about 670,000 children in America suffer from abuse each year. And here was one of them. My son. Tom, do you want to leave this place? I suddenly asked. Tom looked at me with surprise. But I have nowhere to go. I'll figure something out. At that moment, my resolve solidified. The foster father easily agreed to give up Tom for money. We decided to handle the legal procedures later, and I took Tom out that very day. In the car, Tom silently looked out the window. It's okay now. You're safe, I said. He nodded slightly at my words. We arrived at a hotel, and while Tom was taking a shower, I called Trey. I've taken Tom into protective custody. On the other end of the line, Trey let out a sigh of relief. That's good, really good. That night, as I lay awake thinking about Tom sleeping in the next room, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I wondered what I should do from here on. But there was one thing I was certain about. I would never let these children be alone again. Looking at Sarah's photo, I made a vow. It looks like we have a new family now. Watch over us, okay? I woke up to the morning sun streaming into the hotel room. Tom was sleeping in the next room. I realized that last night's events weren't a dream. As we ate breakfast, my head was full of complex thoughts. The pain of losing Sarah was still raw. However, now in front of me were two boys who needed help. A strong feeling welled up inside me. I can't lose another child. I called Trey and proposed that we all live together. He hesitated a bit but eventually agreed. The next challenge was confronting Robert. Our meeting was filled with tension, but ultimately we agreed to divorce. On the day of our final discussion with Robert, his expression was deeply tinged with regret. Blair, I'm truly sorry, his voice trembled. At first, I kept quiet because I didn't want to cause you unnecessary worry. But I know now that was the worst choice I could have made. While I tried to maintain a calm exterior, inside I was seething with anger and sadness. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Robert heaved a deep sigh. I was a coward. I knew how much you were suffering after Sarah passed away. I thought if I told you about this then, I'd lose you completely. I gave a bitter smile at his words. In the end, that choice tore us apart. Robert nodded. I know. I've done something unforgivable. But Trey and Tom, Please. Don't worry, I cut him off. I'll take care of them. You'll pay child support as part of the alimony. Robert looked surprised, but soon his expression changed to one of resignation. I understand. If that can be even a small atonement. After that, Robert began sending child support regularly. Sometimes he would inquire about Trey and Tom's well-being. Although he didn't meet them directly, he seemed to be trying to build a relationship little by little through letters and emails. While harboring complex feelings, I didn't completely cut off Robert's efforts. The children have the right to decide their relationship with their biological father for themselves. That was the conclusion I came to. The alimony will be used for Trey and Tom's care, I informed Robert. He nodded silently. I could see regret in his eyes, but it was too late. The legal procedures were more complex than I had anticipated. The adoption system in America is strict, especially when taking in children with no blood relation. However, with the advice of a lawyer, we overcame each obstacle one by one. Family court hearings, home studies, and countless document preparations. After going through all these processes, I was finally able to obtain legal custody of Trey and Tom. But this was just the beginning. Tom, in particular, suffered from night terrors and anxiety attacks due to his past trauma. I consulted specialists and learned about caring for children with trauma. We tried various therapies such as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. At the same time, I started receiving counseling myself. Sarah's death, Robert's betrayal, and the sudden new family. I needed to face and process these events. It was around this time that I joined a support group called Bereaved Parents of the USA. Meeting other parents who had lost children and sharing our experiences helped heal my emotional wounds little by little. Reconstructing our family was not easy. Trey and Tom also struggled to make up for the years they had spent apart. However, changes gradually occurred. Family meal times increased, and on holidays, we started going out to the park together. There were arguments at times, but including those, we were becoming a new family. Every time I look at Sarah's photo, my heart still aches. But at the same time, I felt as if she was watching over us. Sarah, Mom is doing her best. We're creating a new family with your brothers. Watch over us, okay? Sometimes I wondered if this decision was the right one. But every time I saw Trey and Tom's smiles, those doubts vanished. They gave me a new purpose in life. While cherishing Sarah's memory, they gave me the courage to move forward at the same time. On a spring morning in May, we were heading to the Stuyvesant High School entrance ceremony. Are you nervous? I asked Trey, and he smiled a bit shyly. You'll be fine, Trey. You can do it, Tom encouraged. Over the past year, the bond between the two had deepened remarkably. As the ceremony began and the names of new students were called out, when Trey White was announced, the three of us looked at each other and exchanged smiles. On the way home, we stopped by Central Park. It was Sarah's favorite place. Sarah, did you see? We've taken a new step forward, I whispered in my heart. Trey and Tom seemed to be thinking the same thing. We're surely being watched over by Sarah, aren't we? Trey said quietly. At those words, I couldn't hold back my tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope and gratitude. With Sarah's memory in our hearts, and together with our new family, we continue to move forward. There will surely be more challenges ahead. But we're no longer alone. Because we have each